Right, then with that, let's get started. So very briefly, for those who don't know Lepaya yet, we are a blended training platform focused on one thing, making sure learning sticks. So we design relevant, impactful training programs for your whole organization, from starters to leaders, and also sales teams. And for these training programs, we combine self-paced digital learning using our app with facilitator-led sessions, really focused on application on the job. And we support that end to end. So we take care of a seamless rollout, including planning and communication, as well as measuring impact, which you can track on our portal. So we upskill workforces to create real behavior change and with that drive real impact. And today we will show you how that applies to taking the lead with AI. Because, well, AI is everywhere. And what we're seeing across organizations is actually quite consistent. So, according to research by MIT, there is a lot of investment, and everybody seems to want to accelerate AI, but there has been very little real impact so far. So, then the question, of course, becomes why is that the case? Well, before we dive into that, I am also very curious to hear from you. So, where is your organization today when it comes to AI adoption? So, on a scale from AI aware, we understand AI, but we don't structurally apply it in daily work yet, to AI innovation, where AI is continuously driving and new ways of working, innovation, maybe already even a competitive advantage for your organization. So I see some first responses already coming in. Really nice. Actually, quite a mixed crowd, though there is a clear center. So if we take a look at those results of the poll that I will share with you now, that actually is quite in line with what we see a lot ourselves as well when we speak to organizations. So what we typically see, and as you can also see in those poll results, is that most organizations are somewhere between early AI adoption, awareness, and then early enablement. But there are only very few that have reached that level where AI is truly augmented or already drives innovation. So now the real challenge, of course, becomes how do you move to a fully AI-enabled team or organization where people really know how to best leverage their human skills to amplify AI, where lots of experimentation is happening, and then also beyond, where AI is integrated structurally into day-to-day operations and also workflows? Well, what's interesting is that the MIT research actually also shows that the biggest gap in this isn't technology, it's leadership. So AI isn't just about tools, it's really about how people work, decide, and collaborate differently. So if we look at the companies that drove successful AI implementations, we actually see that over 60% of their success levers are related to leadership and cultural elements, and less than 25% is related to the right tooling and systems. So let's dive into that leadership lever as a driver of successful AI implementation a bit more. Because if we're then being more specific, it actually really is that middle layer of leadership that makes or breaks this shift. So they are the ones that translate strategy into daily work. They are the ones that are close enough to the daily work to craft those experiments or also define an approach to redesign workflows. And at the same time, they are also the ones that are supporting teams through change. So they are closest to driving and making sure that this adoption starts and then continues. And they need help in doing this. Looking at research by Gartner, more than 86% of managers indicate that they struggle with this today. And Pascal, I know you've been speaking to many managers as well as organizations about their challenges and needs around AI adoption. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've learned from those conversations so far.
Sure. Thanks, Soph, and welcome. Good afternoon to most of you. Good morning to some of you. It's really great that you're here. And in the next 12 to 15 minutes, I'd love to give you a sneak peek into the program and into the content that we developed. Because since summer 2025, obviously, we've been talking to many of our clients and prospects about what are the challenges that they are seeing on the topic. And as most of you know, when we're designing learning journeys, we start with a good, solid problem statement. So this is what if we boil it down to the absolute essence, what we learned from our clients is that there is four main problem statements when it comes to leading an AI transformation and then the role of the middle manager in that. So what we hear most often is actually that the leader says, what is actually my role in the equation? Right? So there is experts in the equation, there is executive management, there is individual contributors, but where does the middle manager in this case comes in? And then if the manager comes in, how do you lead if you're not an expert on the topic? Because most often we are at least quite proficient on the topic, but how do we do it if we are not so proficient? And then as you see on the left bottom, we want to promote entrepreneurship, but we also feel and see the risk. So how do we balance like stimulating entrepreneurship, but also managing the risk? And then last but not least, we're leading a team, and in the team we have innovators and we have laggards and we have the majority. And how do we then talk to the team? And when do we talk to individuals? Right? How do we really respect the individual differences? So those are the four problem statements that we see most often. But we'd love to hear from you also in this case. Like which of these problem statements do you recognize most if you think about the AI transformation in your company? And if you see another big one, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. And I think there is a poll coming on this. Yeah, so which challenge or which problem statement do you see most? Yeah, so we have, so let's see how this unfolds. That's cool. Um, and then when I was preparing, I was obviously asking myself, how am I going to draw conclusions from the data that I'm seeing here, right? So it seems like you all recognize them, right? And that the fact that maybe we lack expertise makes it difficult to lead. Um, and I'm also interested, feel free to use the chat to say, hey, if there's any other problem statements that you see that we should actually take into account, because I'm not only here to tell, but I'm also here to learn from you, obviously, what we should consider important here. So knowing that, we use that to develop a program, right? And you see it on the screen here. So you see a learning journey of like approximately 5, 6 weeks, could be 10 weeks, could be 15 weeks. That's a planning question. But then at the bottom, you see 5 different building blocks. And the blocks in blue are instructor-led, and the one in white grayish is self-paced learning. So we start with an interactive keynote speech. Then we have a block of self-paced learning where we help leaders build AI literacy, right? So they won't necessarily become an expert, but they will develop expertise. And then we say, okay, you got to make yourself part of the equation, right? So you got to take charge. How do we do that? Right? So that's a personal transformation question, but also a more technical question. How do you take charge of an AI initiative? And then obviously there is the leadership question, like how do I lead my team? So how do I provide direction using both visionary and directive leadership, but also how do I coach my team using coaching leadership and empowering leadership? Yeah, so those are the main building blocks that we use. And I would love to show you some of the the contents in the program. So let's start here. So there's four main ingredients in the journey. So in this journey, there is new leadership skills for leaders, right? Stuff that they haven't really been confronted with in the past. There is AI literacy skills, but there is also skills that they've used before, but they're using it in a slightly different context. And what we also made part of this journey is a new didactical approach, right? So we didn't just design it the way we used to for other leadership programs. Now, let me go through these four blocks, starting with new leadership skills. And now I'm seeing that it's jumping. So I'm going to go back to where we were, starting with ethical leadership. So what we heard is that many of us thought about it, that it was going to get more important, but we were never the one leading on the topic of ethics. So and we confront learners with it, and we've been doing that over the last couple of months with a case like the one that you see on the right side. So let's imagine that you're launching a digital twin customer service agent. Yeah, so it sounds 100% human, uses customer names, expresses empathy, right? But then somebody says, hey, we're actually not allowed, this is not okay, right? So there's a whistleblower. And then it says, yeah, we should actually place a disclaimer, right, saying, I'm a robot. And then we're asking the leaders like, hey, but this happens in your team, right? You're the leader of the team. So what will you do? How do you take ownership of this ethical challenge? Right? So we discuss, and then obviously we invite the team and say, okay, go find out and answer two questions. Find out if or when we are allowed to do this, right? So that's like a data question, but also a legal question. And there is the ethical question that you see on the right side of the slide. Do you believe this is right or this is just to do it this way? And in this case, people say, okay, it's actually, if we place the disclaimer, it's allowed, right? But so today we can't do it this way. And then we say, okay, but we're lifting up the company, right? We're relocating to the US and now it is allowed. And then we go back to the ethical question and we say, do you think this is just, this is the right thing to do? And then we help them develop their moral compass, right? So to lead with integrity, to lead with morality. So that's one of the topics that is really new, right? That typically is not part of leadership programs today. And there is a second part that is about product thinking. Because if we start working on AI initiatives, right, we can just get going and say, yes, we stimulate entrepreneurship, but we can only invest our time and resources once. So we start identifying use cases, right? And we use AI for that, and we use our gut and our existing knowledge for that, right? But then we say, okay, let's start scoping this use case. And we start applying product thinking principles, right? So we start scoping what are the symptoms, the root cause, what are the outcomes, the outputs, the impact, right? So typical definitions that we use in product thinking. Why? Because if we do that, we won't be first time right, but we can control a bit the waste, the sunk cost, and also the frustration with it. Right? Very important at the bottom, you see the go, no go framework, because we decide upfront how we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the AI use case. So we're not just going to get going and we're hoping for the best. No, we're going to decide at the start how we're going to evaluate later in time. And then we take on one more nice challenge, which is, are you going to build this yourself? Are you going to buy it? Or is it a combination of the two? So we're inviting the learners and say, Go out, investigate, figure out what Salesforce or Lovable or Microsoft or Google, what kind of AI use cases they will be launching, or what is even already available. Because maybe you don't have to develop, right? So in Dutch we say it's better to steal, right, and than to build if you can. And if you already pay for it, why not use it, right? So using more of the existing ecosystem is definitely a big leap. So those are two of the things that we're investing in that are really new. But we're also investing in AI literacy. And I just want to show you a little, like a small snippet from the e-learning that we use. And I hope that you can see this. So the e-learning works on three different levels of AI literacy, right? And this is the middle level. And one of the topics that we're working there is on connectors, meaning you connect your LLM to some of the drives, for instance, or some of the software that you have that you're working with. Now, that might at first be a technical question, but that later on becomes like a data question, right? And a safety question. Is it okay? How do we do this? So we're teaching people about data security, right? And how to remove access to connectors, right? And we're giving them all the sources that they can learn from. And then we're going to teach them how to do it, right? So we're using videos, how to establish those connections. Yeah, so, and this is available in multiple languages, right? So people can just follow. And then we're saying, okay, so now you know. So let's get to it, right? So there's always the same build up. We teach, we show, and then ultimately we say, go do it, right? So we're putting them to the test. So that's how the e-learning is built. And now this was the one on connectors, but there's also chapters on deep research, right? On prompt engineering, on building agents, right? So we want to build AI literacy. Why? Because if we know more about it, we can be more confident in leading. Yeah, so that's super important. So that e-learning is a big chapter for us. And then there is also skills that we already know and that we very often already possess, but we're using it in a more challenging context. So think about coaching, think about storytelling. But then the case, for instance, that we're using here, yeah, is we're saying you're going to coach the innovator in your team, the geek, right? The person that really is the expert. So how do you feel as a leader, right? When you're coaching the leader, the innovator. Yeah. And then we say, okay, so let's assume that they are looking to invest in a certain use case, right? And most probably the trainer already picked up on those use cases in the training. And then we're saying, okay, go coach them. And we know that the leaders are then confronted with the imposter syndrome. Yeah, because they feel like, am I supposed to lead about on something that I have no clue about? And then what role do you play as a leader if you're no longer the expert, but you are accountable, right? So you got to play a role. Are you going to advise? Are you going to enable? Are you going to like steer for compliance? So those are typical cases, right? It's a skill that we know, coaching, but applied in a different context. So we're almost there because the last one has to do with the didactical approach. And as we have many learning experts on the call, you know all about this, right? And so what we asked ourselves is what role should AI play in the learning journey, not as a topic, but as a method? Yeah. And so we're doing two things here. The first one is we're using a lot of AI-backed role plays in self-paced learning before classroom sessions and after classroom sessions. So here's one of them. This guy is called Sebastian, right? And Sebastian is a laggard. He's a financial guy, right? So he wants to be thorough, right? He wants to be trustworthy, and he's not joining the transformation yet. So how do you coach the guy, right? And obviously, so he's fed with AI. And you can do the role plays, you don't need an actor for it. So that's one of the methods that we use. But then in the classroom, we also use a lot of AI, mostly for creation and ideation. Now, let's imagine that you're building a narrative, right? You're working on your visionary leadership. You want to build a narrative that helps mobilize your team. And then we have an AI avatar next to you that says, thanks for involving me. I will help you sharpen your change story, right? I'm built to read and interpret your change story as if I am the brain of the other people listening to your story. So it's going to give feedback. What hormones are triggered with your story? What parts of the brain are activated, right? If it's all of a sudden like all the fear parts of your brain are activated, it's going to give you advice, right? So there's a lot of AI in the classroom also. And then last but not least, and I think this is very important. So I think let's listen to this carefully. We made a very thorough trade-off on what is the facilitator that we need for this kind of journey. Because imagine we take a typical leadership trainer that lacks AI expertise, right? Something is going to go well and something is going to go wrong. So what we chose to do is if you choose, look at a scale from an AI expert, yeah, so like a geek that knows everything on AI on one side, and here there is a good soft skill trainer. The trainer profile that we choose to work with is here. It's an expert on AI that is a good leadership and change trainer. Why? Because what we see in the classroom sessions is that 60 or 70% of the questions coming from the learners are actually quite technical. The most common question is, how does this actually work? And then we need a facilitator that knows the answer, right? So we need an expert that is a good leadership trainer. So that's what we work with. Just to give you an impression, right, of the journey. And then so we'd love to hear from you, right? I've done a lot of talking here. If you think about like the topics in the program, but also maybe the method, right, that we use, what resonates most? We'd love to hear from you in the chat. And there's been some nice interaction I can see already. That's nice to hear, Janneke. Thanks for that. I'm curious what resonates most, obviously, right? So this is a generic comment, and we're very happy with that. What are the elements that, if you look at the leaders in your organization, you're like, ooh, if only they could spend time on that, that would really have an impact.
Also see some thumbs up for the trainer profile, so that seems to resonate. The coaching part. Really nice. So thanks everyone for sharing, and we will make sure to still take a look at it. And also I see some questions coming in that we will touch upon. So, what I personally really like is that it's not only about developing new skills, it's also really about building on what you already do well. So, guiding teams, making decisions, navigating change, but that then in a new context. And of course, it was also already mentioned. This AI context changes at a really rapid pace. So that's also why this AI training program will never be a finished product. So behind the scenes, we are also already working on what's next, and we would love to hear from you and also involve you. So next to what resonates most, we're also curious to learn what would you add to this learner journey? Are there maybe elements that you feel can be added or enrich this or would be a great next step? So please feel free to share this in chat as well, as we're really curious. And to make sure we also have enough time for some more questions. I will already continue, but we'll touch upon it. But just to share, like when speaking to Naomi from VodafoneZiggo, for example, as well as some other clients, we realized that also a topic to explore is leading teams with agents. So at some point, once we're further in our AI adoption and we have maybe teams with agents, how do you lead those teams? As well as data governance, which is of course becoming a bigger and bigger topic. So if there are a few things to take away from today, and we really hope that it is that we shouldn't treat AI as a technology shift. It really also is a people shift in which middle managers play a critical role to drive that adoption. And while they need new skills to navigate this, we also shouldn't forget about the existing skills that stay relevant, just in a new context. And if this sparks some ideas, there are a few ways that we would love to continue the conversation with you. So feel free to book a demo with our team, reach out to Pascal and myself if you're excited to join us in shaping what's next, or download our guide, which we have designed in collaboration with mental well-being partner Open Up on how to increase resilience for AI adoption. And with that, we would love to open the floor for some questions. And I would love to thank everyone for joining. We hope to see you around soon.